In front of us right now we have a range of different Anderson kits, including this one sitting in front of me. Now there's a few different options on the website, and these options, or what you choose, will depend on not only your vehicle but also the camper trailer that you're trying to run, what you're trying to achieve by the Anderson plug. So what we're going to do now is try and run through each of these, when you should choose each particular type and what's going to best suit your vehicle and your setup. So let's get into it and show you the first one. So let's start with probably our most popular Anderson kit in the range, and probably the most basic. So this is our 6BNS standard Anderson with no isolator in it. So firstly, let's talk about when we might consider using this Anderson plug. So the first scenario could be that we don't have a dual battery system in the car, or even if we did, but our camper trailer does have its own DC-DC charger. In that case, we can use this harness to go from the main battery in the vehicle down to the tow bar, and then that can power up the DC-DC charger that's in the camper. If you're using one of the common DC-DC chargers, which would include Enerdrive, Redarc, Projector, they will all have an inbuilt isolator in them. So there's no need to have an isolator on this harness if it's purely powering up one of those in the camper. So that's one scenario when we'd use this kit. Another scenario might be that we have a camper that does not have a DC-DC charger, that the Anderson on its drawbar is wired direct to the house batteries in the camper. And if they're the same type of batteries that we have in our dual battery system in the car, then we could wire this from the auxiliary battery in the car down to our tow bar, and that would share the current from that DC-DC charger in the car and effectively charge our battery under the bonnet or in our dual battery system in the car, and also share some of that current going to the house batteries in our camper. So they're probably the two main scenarios when this type of Anderson kit would be the best option. Now it is available in two sizes as well. This is our 6BNS cable option in front of us. It's also available in a 4BNS cable. And the choice of cable size is really dependent on how much current you're trying to push to the camper. So if you were trying to run a 25 amp DC-DC charger in the camper, this would be the option, a 6BNS Anderson kit. If you wanted to run the Enerdrive 40 amp or the Redarc 40 amp chargers in the camper, then you'd certainly want to upgrade to the 4BNS option. So hopefully that gives you an idea of when to select this Anderson in your setup. So let's just show you what's involved in the kit as well, other than the cabling, the fuse holder and the harness itself. Inside the kit, you're going to have some accessories to aid you with the installation, and this will be pretty similar in all of the Anderson kits. Some of them will have a few extras, but they're all going to have this equipment. So firstly, you've got a bracket that's designed to mount it next to your trailer plug. So you remove the trailer plug off the bracket that it's already mounted on, place this bracket in between the trailer plug and the existing bracket on the car, and it allows us a little extension to mount our Anderson cover like that. So it comes with a cover that once you've routed this cable down, it can be inserted into the cover, and there's videos to show you how to do that on our channel as well. And then all of the equipment needed to secure it, and a spare fuse in case you need one or you want to carry a spare one around, and also some cable ties to add with securing the harness down the chassis rail. So hopefully that explains what's involved in the kit and when to use this particular Anderson. Okay, next up in the range is our Anderson plugs that come with an isolator. And the first one in that series is the one with the Redarc SBI 12 isolator in front of me here. Now, let's firstly talk about when you want an isolator in an Anderson kit. So you would certainly want to choose an isolator if you're trying to run a three-way fridge in a caravan, something that draws a lot of power, and as soon as you turn the car off, you definitely don't want it to be able to flatten the main battery. Or if you had it connected to a camper trailer or a caravan trying to charge batteries that didn't have an isolator inbuilt or a DC-DC charger in the caravan camper, it was just direct, you would still want to consider putting an isolator on there, because you don't really want the possibility of that camper van's load to be able to flatten the main vehicle battery. So that's when we look at using one with an isolator on it. That's a couple of examples. So now let's talk about which isolator you should use. So this isolator is good for vehicles that have a standard alternator or a temperature compensating alternator. It's not good for vehicles that have a variable voltage, or commonly known as a smart alternator. So the entire Toyota range, for starters, runs a temperature compensating alternator. So this works on all the Toyota vehicles out there. So let's go through how this unit actually works and why it's a good choice if you do have one of those alternator types. It's a good, reliable Redarc product, and it's also makes it a very easy DIY install because we don't have to connect into any fuse box in the vehicle. We're using the Redarc module on the front. Now, this module works with those alternators because it's always monitoring the voltage on this terminal, which is connected to our main battery in the vehicle. So what it does is when we start up the vehicle, it'll wait to see that the voltage gets up to that 13.6 range in the car. When it sees that from the alternator, it'll click in, a light will come on in the module, and it will give power to the other terminal, which is connected to our Anderson plug. So the whole time that we're driving, we're going to have power at this Anderson plug running whatever we've got it wired to in the camper. But the other important thing is that when we come to a stop, we turn the vehicle off, it's still monitoring and it will stay clicked in until the main battery voltage in the car gets to 12.6. And that's a fully charged lead acid battery. So once it drops back down to a fully charged battery after being on charge, it will click out, our light will go out, and at that point we no longer have power at the Anderson. So whatever we're using this Anderson kit to run in our camper can in no way flatten our main vehicle battery. So that's the important thing about the isolator, and that's why this one is so easy to operate and use if we've got one of those alternator types. It's simply just, all we need to do basically is mount it to the body of the vehicle with our earth wire connected to give it the earth, and that's all the electrical connections that we need to do as far as the isolator is concerned. So it's very simple, easy DIY install when you need an isolator and you have either a temperature compensating or a standard alternator. It also comes in two different sizes. So this is our 6BNS cable in front of me now. We also have it available in a 4BNS cable, and like we mentioned earlier, that's all dependent on the amount of current you're trying to push down the line. So hopefully that gives you a guide. The second option of an Anderson plug that has an isolator is the one we've got in front of us now. So this one is something that we have to use when we're dealing with a vehicle that has a variable voltage or smart alternator. We can't rely on the module we just looked at in the Redarc SBI 12 because the voltage is all over the place when we're dealing with that kind of alternator. While we're traveling, we could see voltages as low as 12 and as high as 15. So we can't rely on a module to know when the car is running. In that case, we need to connect a large relay. So this is a 100 amp relay, and it needs to be connected into the vehicle's ignition system somehow, so that as soon as it sees that the car's ignition is turned on, it clicks in and stays locked in the whole duration that we drive until we actually turn the key off. Which makes it a little bit less simple for a DIY install, but it is necessary with a variable voltage alternator. So we've already discussed about when you choose Anderson plug that has an isolator. So we're just going to talk about how to install this one now. We'll jump straight to that. So you'll notice very similar, it's connected one end to our battery, one end to our Anderson, like the last solenoid. It has an earth that needs to be connected to the body to give the relay an earth. But the thing that we need to look at and focus on the most in the difference between the two is our activation wire to the relay. Now this is designed to go into an engine bay fuse box in the vehicle. So most of the time you'll have a start battery, fuse box for the whole engine bay will be beside it, and usually that will have an ignition feed or a fuse that's powered by the ignition of the vehicle. So it's definitely worth checking all of that before you purchase this kit. Make sure you have an ignition powered fuse in the fuse box there. And if you do, this kit comes with a lot of accessories to aid you in installing this system into one of those vehicles. So let's just run through. Firstly, we've got, these are called outer circuit fuse holders. So once we've located the circuit in our fuse box that we want to use, we just make sure that our key and everything is turned off in the car. We want to pull that fuse out of the fuse box, and depending on what size we've pulled out, if we've pulled out a 10 amp or a 20 amp or whatever size, we would insert that size into the fuse holder that matches it. So we've got a couple different common ones found in vehicles today. So say we pulled out the 10 amp fuse of the fuse box, we would then insert this fuse into the socket that doesn't have a fuse in. I'll just do it while I'm explaining it. So we've pulled a 10 amp fuse out of the fuse box in the car. We then put a 10 amp into this socket here. Now that's the closest socket to the pins on our fuse holder, like that. And then we can go ahead and insert this into the fuse location that we've found in our fuse box in the vehicle. Once we've done that, there's a piece of heat shrink included in the kit. We can thread that over the end of our fuse holder, plug the end of our cable in that comes from the relay, push those two together, and shrink our heat shrink down with either a cigarette lighter or some kind of heat source, and that's going to seal up that connection a bit and keep it held together. So that's what's involved in connecting this into the fuse box of your vehicle. So the main time that we would choose this, just to reiterate, the main time that we would choose this Anderson kit is if we need an isolator and we're working with a vehicle that has a variable voltage alternator. So the last Anderson in our range doesn't really have any variations. It's designed for one purpose, and that's to run the Elco ESC system in your caravan, most commonly used with a red Anderson plug. So this harness is exactly the same. It works on every vehicle, 7-meter harness, comes with the recommended 30 amp fuse to run ESC, red Anderson, and all the equipment needed to install this to your tow bar. So if your van has ESC, this is the car side of the wiring required.